Everyone, good morning, everyone. All set? Good morning and welcome, everyone, on this beginning of, end of summer, I guess we'd call this. It's a little hot out there. Before we begin, I just wanted to take a moment to recognize the passing of a great individual. We lost Dick Ravitch earlier this summer, and when we gather at an event like this, we're reminded of his profound influence on stabilizing the finances of New York City at a very difficult time in our city's history. And we considered him a giant among equals. Many people relied on him, and I was certainly getting advice from him up until his final days. And so, he guided us through some really challenging times. And you think about the 1975 situation, the city was on the brink of bankruptcy. What we went through trying to save the MTA, which is still a focus of ours together at a time when it was looking at default, and really building a new source of funding and meeting all these great challenges. So we just wanted to acknowledge him and his great contributions to a stabilized city at this time. We are beneficiaries of his work decades ago. I also wanted to acknowledge something else. I think Mayor Adams and his team deserve tremendous credit for weathering a comparable crisis which has befallen the city, and having to have such strong management during this particular situation, this humanitarian crisis, and managing the resources appropriately during this time, I think deserves a lot of credit. And I want to thank him and his team for your work on this effort. And the state will continue to partner with the city to support the operational and fiscal impacts as we head into our budget as well. So, but at this point, I'd like to call the meeting to order. Observe the following designated observers are in attendance today. Doreen Insaraf, observer for the Senate Majority Leader. Mark Wurtzel, observer for the City Council Minority Leader. Matthew Harnish, observer for the Speaker of the Assembly. And I'd now entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the last annual board meeting, which was held September 6, 2022. These minutes were previously distributed. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
So moved. Second? Second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Any nays? You don't have it. All right. The next item on the agenda is the financial plan for fiscal years 2024 to 2027. Mr. Mayor, I understand you'll present the city's four-year financial plan at this time. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And just taking a point of personal privilege, I too want to thank you. You remind me of Sandra, my favorite sister. Even when we have a philosophical disagreement, I have her back and I have your back.
Did Sandra usually win?
Yes.
That's good to know.
We have some real battles that we fought together, from the subway safety plan to navigating COVID to the challenges around mental health. We have been real partners, and I think we've shown an unprecedented relationship between the executive of the governor's mansion and the city of New York. And the only way we can get through this is that we're going to continue to get through it together. And I cannot thank you and your team enough for doing this. I want to acknowledge the presence also of the Controller of the State of New York, Tom DiNapoli, the Controller of New York City, Brad Lander, and the private members, Commissioner Rosado, Stephen Cohen, and my good friend William Thompson, Jr. And I want to thank all the members of my team that are here, including First Deputy Mayor Sheena Wright, Budget Director Jock Jihad. And I'm happy to report that the city's recovery remains strong. We have regained 99% of the jobs lost due to the pandemic. And our economy has been growing at a faster pace than the state or country for approximately 2 years. Our streets are safer, subway crime has dropped, and our gun violence prevention efforts have reduced shootings. City streets, sidewalks, and public spaces are cleaner and more inviting. So no one should be surprised that tourism is on pace to exceed pre-pandemic levels this year, and consumer spending is strong. Our success is due to upstream investments and smart policies. Put simply, we did not take the recovery for granted. We have made the city a better place to live, work, and raise a family. And we have fostered an environment where large and small businesses can prosper. And by carefully managing the city finances, we overcame unprecedented and substantial challenges without raising taxes or resorting to layoffs and service cuts. The most profound challenge has been the rapid and accelerating growth in shelters across our city related to the arrival of 107,300 asylum seekers since spring 2022. Right now, we are housing, feeding, and caring for 59,400 migrants across 200 shelter sites and 15 large-scale humanitarian relief centers. The massive influx has doubled our sheltered population, pushed us to capacity, and is exhausting our resources. The costs are substantial, and we expect them to grow further. We spent $1.5 billion in asylum seeker costs last year. Last month, we shared updated cost projections showing the crisis could cost more than $12 billion over 3 fiscal years, and that we must add $7 billion to the financial plan to cover these expenditures. And I cannot thank the governor for her help in securing $1 billion in aid over fiscal years 2023 and 2024 to the state leaders, Senator Andrew Stewart-Cousins, the Majority Leader, Speaker Carl Hastie, and the entire team up there realizing this impact to our city. We cannot say thank you enough. And for her commitment, the governors, to secure an additional $1 billion in next year's fiscal budgets. We recently received $250 million from this allocation and appreciate the work her administration is doing to accelerate the delivery of funds. As you have recognized in your reports, we will need to add resources throughout the financial plan to accommodate growth in the population that exceeds our forecast and the anticipated increase in daily shelter costs. On top of these unprecedented needs, we had to meet other anticipated and important obligations. When I took office, most of the city's labor contracts had expired. Even recently as yesterday, a contract was expired for 13 years we were able to bring to close. I'm proud of the work our employees do every day to lift working people up and keep the city safe and clean. They deserve certainty and fair pay. And now, more than 80% of our workforce is under contract. To fund new labor settlements, we added $4 billion in fiscal year 2023 and 2024, and $12 billion in out years to the city's labor reserve. Despite facing an unprecedented challenge and having to add billions of dollars to support unexpected needs, we kept fiscal years 2023 and 2024 balanced. I want to emphasize that we accomplished this without layoffs, without raising taxes, and without cutting services, and still have resources to make a nearly $5.5 billion prepayment into fiscal year 2024. Our success is not an accident. In addition to actively supporting the recovery, we carefully managed the city resources by staying focused on core priorities. This includes monitoring economic conditions to ensure that we had the resources to meet needs as they arose, making efficient use of taxpayers' dollars and staying prepared for the future. The fiscal year 2024 budget is $107.1 billion, with out-year gaps of $5.1 billion, $6.8 billion, and $7.9 billion in fiscal years 25 through 27, respectively. At adoption, we were able to balance due to higher than anticipated revenues of $2.1 billion in fiscal year 2023, driven by strength in the local economy. In response to the dramatic growth in the cost of caring for asylum seekers, the need to add funds to support labor deals and economic uncertainty, we implemented PEG programs in November and in April, and a vacancy reduction initiative in January. These actions guaranteed or generated more than $4.8 billion in savings over fiscal year 23 and 24, all without layoffs, service reductions, or school budget cuts. Strong fiscal management also includes setting aside resources for the future. The fiscal year 2024 adopted budget maintains a near record $8.1 billion in reserve, which includes $1.2 billion in general reserve, $2.0 billion in the rainy day fund, $4.58 billion in the retiree health benefits trust, and $250 million in capital stabilization reserve. What we have done have not gone unnoticed. Rating agencies have validated our approach and the city's strong recovery. In February, Fitch Ratings upgraded the city's bond rating to AA from AA- and praised the administration's fiscal management, citing actions to increase reserves and achieve savings. Because we carefully managed the city resources, we were able to make upstream investments and keep New York City safe and clean and deliver on our working people's agenda. I want to thank again the governor for joining me to launch the Gun Violence Prevention Blueprint, a $485 million commitment to keeping New Yorkers safe. The program includes violence interruptions and engaging New Yorkers in positive activities so we can prevent violence before it starts. We're doing more to protect New Yorkers' health with a focus on addressing long ignored mental health needs. Our streets, our sidewalks, and parks are cleaner and more livable. We were able to safeguard beloved institutions like libraries and cultural spaces from budget cuts. And we are investing in sustainability and resiliency because our children do not deserve a future where dangerous heat and air quality emergencies are the norm. The actions we have taken to advance the city's recovery allowed us to meet unprecedented challenge and maintain fiscal strength. This, in turn, enabled us to make investments that promote a resilient New York and protect the most vulnerable members of the community. However, make no mistake, we have some serious challenges ahead of us. Asylum seekers continue to arrive at an unsustainable rate. Absent a real decompression strategy and appropriate fiscal assistance from the federal and state governments, the city's finances will be profoundly stretched in the coming months. I believe we are stronger together as a team. So I look forward to working with you all and elected officials across the city and state to make this a safer, more equitable, and more prosperous city to live and work in for generations to come. As always, I thank you for all the work you do on behalf of the greatest state and the greatest city on the globe. There's a lot of dispute about number 2 and 3. There's no dispute about number 1. It's New York City and New York State. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well said, Mayor, and I also want to commend, especially hearing this report, your incredible stewardship of this city during these, as you say, unprecedented times. I think history will look back and say, given a pandemic, a slower than expected recovery, challenges and occupancy, return to work issues, and couple all that with the humanitarian crisis that could not have been foreseen. Partnerships are important, but also individual leadership, and I want to commend you for what you've done for our beloved city. So thank you, Mayor. Thank you. I also want to welcome our State Comptroller, Tom DiNapoli, here in his official role to be the first person with any questions. And again, thank you, Tom, for everything you do for the people of the state of New York. Any comments, Mr. Comptroller?
As well. Thank you, Governor Hochul, and thank you, Mayor Adams, for your very thorough report to the board. I'd like to acknowledge my fellow Controller, City Controller Brad Lander, and fellow Control Board members, the Honorable and still kind of Controller Bill Thompson, great mentor to me when I started out in this role, Rosanna Rosada, and Steve Cohen as well. And I certainly want to thank Michelle McManus and the board staff for the wonderful relationship we enjoy with you. I'm joined by Rahul Jain, who heads our Office for New York City. He and his team worked on the report that we put out on the city's fiscal year 2024 budget and financial plan. We put that out last month, and it's been distributed for all the board members today. So I'd like to offer some observations from my office on the city's economic and fiscal outlook for the record. The preliminary operating results for fiscal year 2023 tell a continuing positive story about New York City's economic resilience and the valuable role of federal relief to boost post-COVID recovery. For the third year in a row, city revenues exceeded expectations by a wide margin, about $5 billion. Collections remain strong despite a return to normal for Wall Street profits, softness in the real estate sector, and looming concerns over inflation and a possible recession. The city also implemented multiple rounds of the program to eliminate the gap savings program in fiscal year 2023 that will help balance the budget over the life of the financial plan, as the mayor has appropriately pointed out. The PEG will generate savings to reduce planned gaps by an average of $2.7 billion annually beginning in fiscal year 2024. These funds allowed the city to boost spending in other areas in fiscal year 2024, some of which was used to address prior areas of uncertainty. Notably, the city settled some of its biggest labor contracts, including with DC 37, the PBA, and UFT. As the mayor reminded us, now over 3/4 of the city's unionized workforce have a contract. These wage patterns are reflected in the city's financial plan, a step towards greater fiscal certainty and a help to retain and recruit employees. This is an important victory for the city and its public servants, the people who help shepherd the city through the COVID-19 pandemic by providing essential services. Better revenue, recurring savings, a strong workforce, and improved fiscal certainty over the city's personnel costs are all welcome. And with inflation slowing in recent months, the risks of a severe recession have receded, which should improve the economic and revenue outlook for the city. In fact, if the city does not experience its projected decline in revenue in fiscal year 2024, it would reduce future budget gaps by billions as long as new spending is restrained. This is a good reminder. Continuing to make foundational investments and monitoring their effectiveness in public safety, education, and other core city services can help the city retain and grow its tax base. These steps ultimately boost the city's competitiveness and help bring the necessary tax dollars in to fund services that the city needs to continue to make progress on, including mental health and homelessness. The upside scenario, where recession can be avoided, represents a hopeful outcome. But recent events and the city's fiscal history remind us that preparation is key. This approach is even more critical now as changes made to the financial plan since last year have resulted in larger budget gaps. Since budget adoption, it has become even more clear that many of the budgetary risks facing the city remain out of its direct control. By the city's own calculation, budget gaps now average roughly 8.2% of spending in the out years, the highest level since fiscal year 2012 at this point in the budget cycle. Despite better than projected revenue of more than $5 billion, the city generated a smaller surplus than last year and has not set aside additional planned funds in its reserves. This is a missed opportunity. Given planned spending, current reserve levels leave the city no better prepared for fiscal uncertainties than it was in June of 2022. There are budget risks we know about that have gone over budget for a number of years. Those risks, from unfunded educational programming, social services, and the MTA, could amount to over $2.3 billion annually by fiscal year 2025 and rise above $3.5 billion by 2027. Additionally, the cost of managing the influx of migrants is of great concern and will exceed the city's initial projections of $2.9 billion this year. The most recent projected cost would fully exhaust the city's contingency reserves in this year. Further, the city initially budgeted migrant costs to decline to $1 billion in fiscal year 2025, but it recently suggested costs will rise to $6.1 billion in that year. The current plan includes no migrant costs in fiscal year 2026, an increasingly unlikely outcome given current trends. Immigration is a federal issue, and the federal government has to lead, as the mayor and the governor have indicated. The migrant crisis should qualify as a national emergency and is best suited for a federal response. That response should include providing matching funds to help shoulder the immense burden on the city and to provide policy solutions, including orderly review of cases for asylum. Any city or state action on this issue will remain incomplete without a federal policy response. To ease the pressure on the city's shelter system and reduce homelessness, the City Council passed legislation to expand rental assistance vouchers to more New Yorkers in shelters. While admirable, it is projected that this policy change will cost the city billions of dollars by the end of the financial plan period and likely continue to grow after. Considering the various risks we have identified, my office projects that budget gaps could grow to $9.9 billion in fiscal year 2025, $13.4 billion in fiscal year 2026, and $16.2 billion in fiscal year 2027. That's a cumulative budget gap of possibly $39.5 billion over 3 fiscal years. Barring a period of healthy economic growth and federal aid, this cost growth is not sustainable. It may also lead to the deterioration of city services or outright cuts, hurting the very people who are aided by many city programs today. Appreciate the governor referencing our friend Dick Ravage. I wanted to make comments as well with regard to Dick, a friend to all of us. He observed in 2018, when discussing fiscal pressures facing all states and local governments, I think an important thought. Dick, as we all know, was deeply engaged in New York City finances until his final days. He noted that the fiscal discipline and transparency that was required by the city's transition and adherence to generally accepted accounting principles, 4-year plans, and regular budget updates allowed the city to avoid future fiscal crises. This transparency, which led to the honest conversations, as he called it, that were necessary about the city's finances, informed the public's understanding of what the city could afford and what it could not. The spending pressures I outlined will not impact the city's budget until fiscal year 2025, but tough decisions lie ahead, and time is of the essence. For its part, the city can incorporate unbudgeted spending risks into its financial plan, ensure full analysis and discussion about new spending programs, formalize its plan for reserves, and communicate its performance management efforts and how they are informing budgetary choices and the delivery of services. As I conclude, I would just observe that this is my 17th control board meeting. I don't know if that's factored into my pension, but I think it's not. And I've seen a lot happen over those 17 years of these meetings. Certainly I've seen the impact on the city and our state of the Great Recession and COVID, among many other fiscal challenges over the years. But it is difficult to think of a time where the city and state's fiscal fortunes seemed so deeply intertwined as they are today. Planning, coordination, and communication are critical to a response that rises to the formidable challenges, a response that gives the public and the capital markets confidence that this crisis, too, will pass. The role of this board to elevate visibility around the city's fiscal situation and encourage discussion about the challenges facing both the city and the state is an important one for the people we all serve. Again, my thanks to my colleagues on the board, the staff of the Control Board, the City Controller's Office, the Office of Management and Budget, and the State Division of Budget for your work and efforts during these very trying times. Thank you.
Thank you, Comptroller DiNapoli. At this time, we'll hear from Comptroller of the City of New York, Brad Lander, and I want to welcome him as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Governor. Since you and the mayor and the state controller and the first deputy mayor and I were all on Eastern Parkway yesterday for the West Indian Day Parade, I think next year we should have the control board meeting in Brooklyn out on the Parkway. Welcome also to the other board members, Rosanna Rosado, Stephen M. Cohen, and I want to say thank you to my predecessor and friend Bill Thompson, and to the state controller for helping me come on board as controller here. This is only my second of these, so I got a ways to go to get to 17, but thank you both. And we are also submitting, as the state controller did, our adopted budget report, which is available. A lot has changed since last year's meeting of this board. While, as you've heard, the city continues to face quite meaningful long-term challenges that we must thoughtfully address, we are on stronger economic footing to do so, and I think it bears attending that, if you had had this meeting 3 years ago, 2 years ago, 1 year ago, I don't think you would have predicted the economic footing that the city sits on. Rumors of New York City's demise of a doom loop are greatly exaggerated. Private sector employment is back to pre-COVID levels, though job growth remains below the extraordinary trends seen in the decade prior to the pandemic. Overall office occupancy, of course, is at a lower level as a result of the shift to remote and hybrid work, but the total number of office-using jobs is at an all-time high. The city's regional share of them is increasing, and new data indicate that office attendance is recovering better than in most other U.S. cities. And the present day, the near-term state of city finances contains meaningful good news as well. Personal income tax revenues are well above 2019 levels. Property tax collections in the past fiscal year were up 6.7% versus the prior year. Non-property tax collections up 3.9%, and strong pension returns of 8% during the fiscal year that ended June 30th will enable the city to reduce its contributions by $330 million through fiscal year 27. Still, as everyone has noted, and as I will underline as well, there are serious fiscal pressures, necessary and long-awaited wage increases for the city's essential workforce, the end of COVID-19 federal subsidies, and especially the growing cost of providing shelter and support for people seeking asylum without adequate federal support. Because of these and other factors, we project an FY 2027 budget gap nearing $14 billion. So we will need even stronger fiscal stewardship to address these gaps. We have heard rightly about the city's PEG plans at each moment that the mayor has had the opportunity, but we should convert them from if City Hall chooses to do them exercises to exercises that are part of the 4-year planning cycle and process, just like the rest of the things that were adopted at the time of the Financial Emergency Act. Such an approach would better identify long-term efficiencies, including staff management strategies and attrition planning, that prevent over-reliance on unsustainable vacancies and overtime, while preserving and strengthening capacity to meet critical needs. Like the state controller, we continue to urge the adoption of a standardized framework for the city's rainy day fund to protect it from the vicissitudes of the annual budget process. While the city made significant deposits into the city's long-term reserves in FY 2022, putting them at near historic highs, no deposits were made in fiscal year 23, nor was progress made toward establishing deposit and withdrawal rules, which we would look to the city's office management and budget to develop, but that should become more formulaic and standard. We also continue to support state legislation to make the General Debt Service Fund a permanent feature of the city's financial and budgetary system, like so many other of the important features of the Financial Emergency Act. And additionally, we continue to advocate for stronger city systems to better track grant revenues and expenses so we could get what we are owed by the federal government, to modernize our payroll operations, and to hold city agencies accountable for claim settlement payouts, which cost the city $1.5 billion in fiscal year 2022. More broadly, we urge an approach that emphasizes competent, compassionate, and coordinated government in rising to the serious challenges we face. Everyone has spoke about, and rightly so, the need to step up together with the federal government and in coordination to the dramatic increase of people seeking asylum. Let's be clear, the issue is not the arrival of people here. Immigrants have long been a driver of New York's economic growth, and I think we all believe they will continue to be. However, providing so many of them with shelter is operationally demanding and extremely expensive, likely to cost over $4 billion this fiscal year. That challenge is the intersection of the federal obligation to provide safe haven for those seeking asylum with the obligation grounded in the New York State Constitution, albeit specified through a city-level consent decree, to provide shelter to those who seek it. So we must work more ambitiously together across all 3 levels of government to rise to it. That's why I was honored to join the mayor last week for a press conference pushing the federal government for more rapid work authorizations and resources. Recently, both the city and the state have begun to resource efforts to help people apply for asylum before they hit their one-year deadline, and then help them to obtain work authorization when they're eligible 6 months later. While we should continue to pressure the federal government to eliminate the waiting period and provide vastly more funding support for shelter and services, we cannot wait to significantly scale up legal assistance in order to help as many people as possible to file before they hit their one-year deadline to apply. If we're not able to do that, people will go out of status in our shelter system, and it will be much more difficult to help them achieve work authorization at any point. That's the fastest path within our power to help new arrivals get on their feet and reduce shelter census and city costs, and it's good to see those efforts growing, and we need to do a lot of work to grow them as fast as we possibly can. The crisis of affordability, especially housing affordability, facing working families in New York is one of the biggest risks facing the city's economy. I want to praise both the governor and the mayor for calling for action to address it. There is really, in my opinion, nothing more important to putting the city on sound long-term economic footing and addressing the growing crisis and the continuing crisis of affordability. And so I hope that those efforts will bear fruit in the years to come. To me, it seems like there's a good deal to combine a new multifamily tax framework like the one our office put forward that would replace 421A with something that better enables development while focusing subsidies on truly affordable housing with stronger tenant protections to protect tenants from eviction without good cause. But whatever that deal that is made, I think we all want to continue to work as hard as we possibly can to address the crisis of housing affordability at the state and the city levels. Like others, like the governor and the state controller, I will also evoke Dick Ravitch's memory, in particular thinking about the ways in which meeting our expansive transportation and infrastructure needs also require partnership. Congestion pricing is a smart approach both to addressing congestion and raising the revenue for the long-term investments we need. I praise the governor for supporting it, despite some noise from across the Hudson. To get more out of federal infrastructure funds, I urge the state to adopt performance standards that ensure projects meet our state of good repair, climate, and street safety goals. And we have made some progress together, led by City Hall, toward improving our capital projects management with 5 of the 9 bills that we worked together to support in the state legislature. However, 2 of the 4 were, I think, the most impactful ones, and substantial work remains to be done to make sure we get the most out of every single infrastructure dollar from the federal government, from the state government, and of our own city capital, which is also outlined in this plan, a precious resource for climate sustainability, for economic thriving, and for the sustainability of our infrastructure at a critical time. Finally, as the governor and mayor's new New York panel argued last year, securing our economic future through inclusive growth that builds on New York's strengths as a place of density, diversity, and creativity will require new investments in childcare, in mental health, in transit, in the public realm, and in climate readiness. And we have to keep an eye on those, even with all the other challenges we're facing. Even with the approaches to savings and efficiencies discussed here, those new investments will likely require new revenues, and we need to begin thinking about what kind of effective and progressive new revenues might enable us to make the investments that are critical for the city's future without further burdening low-income or middle-income New Yorkers, so that we can invest in and grow rather than risk straining our economy. I hope together we use this moment to turn our shared priorities into policies that enable a thriving and equitable New York City for decades to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Controller. At this time, we'd like to call on Michelle McManus, the Deputy Director of Finance and Capital, to present the staff's comments and to commend you and your team's work throughout the year to help maintain the fiscal integrity of our city. So thank you.
Thank you, Governor. The city continues to show healthy job growth with the creation of approximately 171,000 new jobs in the first 7 months of 2023, representing a 3.8% increase, exceeding the national growth of 2.7%. However, unlike the nation, which saw positive growth in all sectors, certain sectors in the city, such as retail, trade, manufacturing, utilities, information, as well as transportation and warehousing, experienced slight declines. Despite these declines, collectively, the city's private sector outperforms the nation's private sector. With the current addition, the city's payroll jobs have now surpassed the pre-pandemic level by about 32,000. While jobs in the city have recovered, the number of employees working in offices is still significantly below the pre-pandemic level. The combination of hybrid working schedule and high office vacancy rates paints a somber picture for the commercial real estate market, which continues to remain depressed. On the other hand, tourism maintains its strong recovery. The New York City Tourism and Conventions projects that the number of visitors will surpass the pre-pandemic level by 2024. The city's sales and hotel room occupancy tax revenue estimates also points to an expectation of a strong recovery in the tourism industry. In general, after reaching a peak of 9.1% in June 2022, inflation has been trending down in response to the Federal Reserve's rate hikes. However, the most recent data shows headline CPI inching up to 3.2% after 12 consecutive months of decline. Similarly, the Federal Reserve's preferred inflation measure, the Personal Consumption Expenditures Price Index, ticked up to 3.3% in July. The Federal Reserve has indicated that further rate increases will be guided by data on the impact of monetary policy on economic activities, inflation, and financial development. On July 26, the Federal Reserve raised the federal funds rate by another 25 basis points to a range of 5.2% to 5.5% after skipping a rate increase in its June meeting. On balance, the Financial Control Board believes that most current economic data points to a slowdown in the economy over the next 12 months. However, the Control Board at this point is not forecasting a recession in the coming year. The June 2023 June modification totals $110.8 billion, an increase of $9.7 billion from the start of the fiscal year, almost $6 billion of which is in city funds portion of the budget. Contributing to the growth of the fiscal 2023 expenditures are the cost of providing services to asylum seekers, amounting to $1.5 billion, and the incremental cost of labor agreements for the 2021 to 26 round of collective bargaining, totaling $2.3 billion. More than offsetting the higher expenditures was a collection of $5.2 billion in tax revenues in excess of the June 2022 plan, with personal income, business, and sales taxes making up the greater part of the increase. Additionally, the drawdown of reserves in prior year payables allowed the city to achieve a budget surplus of $5.5 billion. The budget surplus was used to prepay fiscal year 2024 expenses, resulting in a balanced budget in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. However, while the fiscal year 2023 budget is GAAP balanced, expenditures net of prepayments exceed revenue estimates. Consequently, the fiscal year 2023 prepayments fell below those in fiscal year 2022, the first time prepayments have declined since recovering from the pandemic. The fiscal year 2024 adopted budget totals $171 billion and closes a $4.2 billion gap projected in last June's financial plan. Since then, fiscal year 2024 city-funded expenditures were revised upward by $4.5 billion, $1.3 billion more than the increase to city fund revenues. This widened the gap initially projected to $5.5 billion, which was closed with the prepayment of fiscal year 2024 expenses at the end of fiscal year 2023. As in fiscal year 23, contributing to the increase in expenditures are the incremental costs of collective bargaining and providing for the asylum seekers, which are estimated at $1.7 billion and $2.9 billion, respectively. Based on data released after the financial plan, the city projects the fiscal year 2024 cost for asylum seekers at over $4.7 billion. The fiscal year 24 budget, as submitted, shows a decline of $3.7 billion from the fiscal year 2023 budget. However, net of prepayments, the fiscal 2024 budget is $1.1 billion higher, due primarily to the general and capitalization reserves. Net of the reserves and prepayments, the fiscal year 24 budget is essentially flat relative to the 23 budget, with a modest decline of $300 million. Beyond fiscal year 24, the June financial plan projects budget gaps of $5.1 billion in fiscal year 25, growing to $7.9 billion by fiscal year 2027, as the growth in city fund expenditures is projected to outpace growth in city fund revenues by 10.3 percentage points between fiscal years 24 and 27. The FCB's risk analysis shows budget surpluses of $70 million in fiscal year 23, $702 million in fiscal year 24, but larger gaps of $6.5 billion in fiscal year 25, $9.9 billion in fiscal year 26, and $12.6 billion in fiscal year 27. The higher gaps are due to the FCB's expenditure estimates exceeding the city's plans projections. On the other hand, the FCB projects higher tax revenues in each of fiscal years 23 to 26, but lower tax revenues in fiscal year 27. The greatest uncertainty to our risk analysis are the expenditures related to asylum seekers, which were based on initial data released with the adopted budget. Based on the most recent data, the city is projecting higher costs relative to the financial plan to provide services for the asylum seekers in fiscal years 24 and 25 by $1.8 billion and $5.1 billion, respectively. The FCB expects the city to update its projections of asylum seekers' expenses in its next modification. The current financial plan points to a challenging fiscal outlook. Out-year gaps are higher than those in the April plan. The budgeted general reserve in fiscal year 2024 is $355 million less than that for fiscal year 2023 at budget adoption last year. Finally, the FY23 prepayment is $635 million less than the fiscal year 22 prepayment, indicating the city had to use part of the roll-in of prior year resources through prepayments to balance the fiscal 24 budget. Considering the fiscal challenges ahead, we encourage the city to continue to develop and implement programs to eliminate the gap with a focus on efficiency and recovering savings to address the projected structural imbalance in expenditure and revenue growth. The city's 5-year capital plan for fiscal years 23 to 27 amounts to $98 billion in total funded authorized commitments. The city projects 80% of the capital plan to be funded with tax-supported debt, with the assumed debt service expense as a percentage of tax revenues expected to remain below the affordability threshold of 15%, based on current tax revenue projections and assumptions of the local economy. The debt service costs are projected to accelerate as a portion of the operating budget and require an increasing percentage of tax revenues. Additionally, in the current rising interest rate climate, debt service savings will be less available. Given the high level of commitments in the 5-year capital plan, the city may not be able to achieve its targeted total. Consequently, we urge the city to undertake a critical review of its capital program and give more consideration to establishing a plan that can be practically undertaken and managed. Without effectively managing spending, the capital program may become unaffordable, as there could be increasing pressure to support other expense areas while tax revenue growth is relatively moderate. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Director. At this time, we'll hear from our other members, known as private members, but we thank them for their service, and I want to open up the floor to any of our individual members who'd like to comment on the mayor's plan. Controller?
I'll be very brief. And hadn't planned on saying anything, but in listening to the challenges that we continue to face, I would like to compliment the mayor on his leadership. Things don't happen on their own. And your leadership of the city during these incredibly difficult times, that of your team led by First Deputy Mayor Wright, Budget Director Jiha, and so many others, is moving the city in the right direction during these incredibly difficult times. So I would like to compliment you and your team, the direction, the fiscal stability that you are bringing and moving us forward, and Governor, for your leadership and your partnership with the city, because nothing happens on its own again. And if the city and state aren't together, heaven knows what happens moving forward. But working together, it is clear there is no challenge that can't be overcome. So let me thank you for your leadership, Mr. Mayor, and your team, for your leadership. Governor, for your team also. It's a great team, and I love working with some of your people. So, again, difficult times, the word has been used has been unprecedented. That may be understating it, because I don't know, coming out of a pandemic and looking at the humanitarian crisis that we face and people arriving on a daily basis, heaven knows. But the city and state are in good hands with the leadership of both of you. So,
Any comments on that? Just take a compliment and say, Lance.
Ditto, just, I hope Chris takes you word for word,
All right, any of our other members? Stephen? Steve
I'll also
Cohen?
be very brief. Given where we came from, and it really is a privilege to be allowed to continue here, I do think that it has been extraordinary, both the cooperation, but also the willingness to address the realities of the situation. Although the presentations demonstrate a bright future, it's not without challenges. And I appreciate the mayor calling out consistently, the governor supporting him, especially recently in Washington, with the difficulties presented by the asylum seekers and the fiscal realities that present over time, but also to both controllers. In particular, you can't read the Office of the State Controller report without getting to page 9 and 10 and being taken sort of up short because of, as Controller DiNapoli already pointed out, the potential risks in the future related to a number of programs largely driven by the issues presented by the asylum seekers. And I appreciate both that and Controller Lander in particular, the realities of that are faced by every mayor with respect to overtime. But the fact that those are pointed out so directly, I think gives us all an opportunity to be mindful that there are real risks here, and that as my good friend Bill pointed out, those risks have to be met not just with leadership, but with partnership. And so I thank you and Ms. McManus as well for her incredibly professional approach to what is never easy.
Steve, any comments, Mayor?
Not at all.
Okay. Commissioner Rosato, anything?
No, I think everything has been said, but I would add that in the, as this discussion is really about the finances, I would also like to commend, both, the city and the state for showing its humanity. This is a humanitarian crisis, but what we're doing is demonstrating our humanity for others. And I think that is important. That's what we stand for. So thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Ortiz, anybody else? Any other commentary? Okay, we're all good. All right. Well, I now call on, let's see, any other comments from anyone in the room? Do you have any recommendations on the proposed budget here?
Yes, I'll go over those. Thank you.
Okay.
The Financial Emergency Act contains 5 conditions that we review to determine whether or not the city is experiencing fiscal stress. I'd like to go over them now for the board. 1, the city shall have incurred a deficit in excess of $100 million in the results of operations. The city has ended fiscal year 2023 subject to the final audit with a surplus of $5.5 billion and has prepaid fiscal year 2024 expenses. 2, the city shall have failed to pay principal or interest on any of its notes or bonds when due or payable. 3, the city shall have issued notes in violation of the restrictions on short-term borrowing set forth in Section 9B of the Act. 4, the controllers shall have jointly certified that they cannot, on the basis of facts existing at the time of such certification, make the joint certification required to terminate a control period. The city has paid all principal and interest on its notes and bonds and has not violated any of the short-term borrowing provisions of the FEA. The Financial Control Board has also received letters from the state and city controllers informing us that they do not see any likelihood that they would have reason to issue a joint certification relating to market access. 5, the city shall have violated any provision of the Act, and such violation substantially impairs the ability of the city to pay principal or interest on its notes or bonds when due or payable, or the city's ability to adopt or adhere to a balanced operating budget. The city has not violated any provisions of the Act. The staff therefore recommends that the board approve a resolution determining that as of September 5th, 2023, none of the events which would have required the imposition of a control period has occurred, nor is there a substantial likelihood and imminence of such occurrence, and that the city is not experiencing fiscal stress at this time that would jeopardize the orderly functioning of the city's fiscal affairs. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments from our audience here today? So identify yourselves. All right, hearing none. I'll now entertain a motion to approve the determination. Is there a second? Second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay? The ayes have it. I'll now entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Thank you. A second?
Second.
Second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay? The meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Thank you, Beverly.
All right, thank
Andrew,
you. Thank you
good
very
to
much.
see you.
Michelle. Thank you.